Sebastian Peck. I'm the managing director of InMotion Ventures. InMotion Ventures is Jaguar Land Rover's venture capital arm. We also develop proprietary mobility services. We are currently trialing one in London. And in a couple of days' time, we're going to announce our second service, so watch this space. We've been around since 2016. We are very early stage, sort of active early stage investor, seed to Series B. We've done about 14 investments in the last 12 months, and we always continue to look for very interesting new investments that complement effectively our strategy. So our strategy in a nutshell, I would say, is focused on building two ecosystems around urban mobility and the great outdoor adventure, which roughly corresponds to our two brands, Jaguar and Land Rover. And the idea is to really utilize the whole toolkit all the way from venture capital to M&A and developing our own services to create a really rich ecosystem for what we believe are current and then hopefully also future customer generations that we can excite and get really sort of into our brands.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Liad, tell me about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so Liad, I'm the founder and head of Here Mobility. Before that, I spent, can you hear me? Okay, I'll try with this one. Hi, so I'm the founder and head of Here Mobility. Before that, I spent 6 years at Waze, from a very early stage when it was a very small startup, and then 3 years after it was acquired by Google. At Waze, I studied the whole data entity from big data analytics, data science, and I was leading the data strategy there. I was also was responsible for the maps entity and the quality part of Waze. Now with Here Mobility, we're doing something completely different, a shift of paradigm from car ownership to mobility as a service. Our mission is to reshift the entire market from a monopolized market to a democratized market, to bring everyone back to the game in order to create efficiency of mobility.
Yeah. Fantastic. So that's my first question, really. Can you just talk about the notion of monopoly? Do you see that as something which exists in London especially? Do you see it as a risk going forward? Or actually, do you see it as, if we get a few giant players involved with driving this change, that actually we might get there sooner rather than later? And I know your views on this, so I'm going to start off with Sebastian.
Sure. Thank you. I think it's a slightly bit more complex. Obviously, monopolies per se don't really exist in most sort of Western regulated markets because there's a cartel office, there's an anti-competition authority, and typically what you have is a slightly more diversified market structure. Now, what we do see is large players like Uber and others who are obviously well-funded, who have achieved a degree of scale and liquidity that gives them a real competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage is the immediacy with which the service is available. The more cars you have on the road, the better your ETAs, the more compelling is the service. And there's very, very clear evidence that if the ETA drops below, say, 5 minutes, for example, customers turn away. So there's a real competitive advantage there. Not everyone can achieve that degree of scale and that degree of liquidity. And that means you do have only certain players who can play the game in the moment. I think that is an important fact. And I think to that extent, I agree with you. The question is, how can you overcome this? I think in part, the market will probably adjust itself at some stage. We shouldn't forget that Uber's offering and a lot of the other ride-hailing offers are effectively subsidized transport. They're subsidized by VCs as opposed to the public coffers, but they are subsidized. They're not delivering the service at the real cost, and they're not profitable. And that can last for so long, but eventually they will have to become profitable. And I think one of the things we see in the market is the time scale with which people were thinking, or in terms of which people were thinking about the shift to autonomous, looks very, very challenging now. And I don't think Uber has another 10 years, to basically run the business in the way it runs it currently. So something will have to change. Now, from a premium OEM perspective, what we find interesting is looking at the market through the lens of proper customer segmentation. If I'm slightly controversial, Uber is the McDonald's of mobility. That doesn't mean, I have to eat there every day. I don't even want to eat there every day. There are a lot of other offerings for which there is a market. We know that. People might want to have a more comfortable experience, a more personalized experience. They want to have an experience that extends beyond the sheer transportation, security services and the like. So there are lots of really interesting things you can do if you think about the transportation of children, for example. You don't just chuck your child into an Uber and hope it'll arrive on the other side. There's plenty of room there to innovate and to create some amazing services that meet the requirements of that specific customer group, which are parents. So I think the landscape will look much more differentiated and much more interesting and much more diverse as new players come in and as these niches emerge and as you see some really interesting technological innovation that is very much tailored to these sort of specific niche markets.
Fantastic. Liad, I know Here Mobility is doing some amazing things around driving collaboration and speaking up for the non-monopoly players. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that if we look at making mobility more efficient in the future, one of the biggest risks is the monopolization of this market. And we see it worldwide. We see it as a trend worldwide. We see Uber and Didi signing an agreement where Uber coming out of China, leaving it to Didi. They did the same with Grab in Southeast Asia, and they did the same with Yandex in Russia. So we see that the big players actually divide the world between them. And I really hope that what my friend here just said, that we will see a diversified market. We will see a variety of services. But right now, the trend is quite the opposite. And we see what happens when you have monopolies. We see the outcome is not only not efficiency, we see the opposite. In New York, for example, if traditionally in New York there were 20,000 taxis, there are now 80,000 more vehicles when you take Uber and Lyft combined, which creates a completely new problem. Not only they don't solve the problem, they add to it. And that's the problem that we need to face. We need to make sure that the action that we're taking now create a change in the market and diversify it in order to create efficiency in the mobility space.
Fantastic. And just tell me a little bit about what exactly Here are doing to drive that change. Just a couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So what we're doing is the first thing that we introduced 5 months ago, only 5 months ago, was a new idea. In order to create a competitive market, we need a marketplace. We need a one-stop shop where every mobility service provider worldwide will be able to offer their services, like taxis, private hires, car rental companies, public transport, helicopters, airlines, whatever that can get you from A to B, to sell this offering worldwide, and then to open it up to everyone that want to consume it worldwide, and just to have this neutral bridge between supply and demand in order to open this market. And what we see is quite amazing, that within 5 months, the adoption of this new idea is super fast. We already have more than 120 cities with 3-digit number of suppliers already joined this marketplace. That's a huge movement, and that's the future that we want to build. But that's not all of it, because even if you have a market which is a healthy market with a variety of services, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have an efficiency of mobility, because the problem that we need to solve is people movement, how people are efficiently moving in the urban area. And what we now introduce in London Tech Week is the ability to connect cities to the data that is needed in order to turn them to smart cities, in order to create efficiency of people movement in the urban area. Because currently, the cities are quite disconnected from all the mobility service provider. In order to create an efficient mobility, in order to move people around efficiently, they need to understand how people are moving around, with which means of transportation, from where to where, when. And currently, they cannot do that because the market is so hyper-fragmented. Everyone has its own API, has its own protocol, that the cities are just unable to do that. And because we already connect all the mobility services to one place, we can now, for the first time, enable cities to have this kind of visibility and access to all the mobility services and give them the chance to regain control and to create optimization of people movement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a really interesting service and does go some way towards bringing together the whole of the ecosystem. And that really is my next question, basically. Every day, my job really is to try and get the telcos to play with the insurers, to play with the startups, to play with the automotives, the cities, and it's really, really tough. I've got two questions for you. One is what are the enablers to help those organisations collaborate? Because unless they do, we're not really going anywhere particularly quickly. And the second question, you know when you have a party and there's always one fella that turns up at midnight, just as everybody else is starting to go. Who's going to be late to the party and what can we do to sort of drive those along?
I think in terms of collaboration and creating, if you like, an ecosystem where people can collaboratively create value, I think this is very much a mindset thing. I think what you see in traditional corporations is very much a mentality that you want to sort of understand where the boundary of your business should be, where you should sit in the value chain, what should be yours, what should you be controlling. And I think this is not the way the tech and the software world works, where it's much more about a networked approach to innovation, where it's much more about collaboration and creating these nodes and connections between different parts of the ecosystem. If you want an example, at InMotion, for example, when we invest in companies, we don't have a captive approach. So if a company decides tomorrow to work with, or even do its first project with BMW or Ford, I don't really care about that. What I want is something amazing, because most of the time the things people are working on are relevant for everyone. If I invest in an insurance company, there's absolutely no point to expect them to just serve our customers or even start there. There may be a better way into the market to scale the business. So I think that is very, very important, and that takes just a different mindset. In terms of who's late to the party, I would say everyone is rapidly catching up. I don't think anyone still walks around and thinks this isn't the real thing. The way we think about this at InMotion is we have sort of three pillars, if you like. We have the core business with its core R&D capabilities, creating fantastic products, having a lot of engineering and design prowess. In the middle, we have what we call the industry frontier, and this is really what you're referring to. It's the sort of the consensus which has formed in the industry that there is a new set of activities which has become part and parcel of the business model. No car manufacturer is really talking about themselves today as a car manufacturer. Everyone is a mobility company. And that's a recognition that you also need to rebuild that customer interface that you've lost when you basically gave away, your sales channels and sort of, franchise the model. So in that sense, I don't really have any hesitation to say the industry is on top of it. It's more about understanding how to actually collaborate and when you have to sort of how to balance, if you like, the corporate discipline with an openness and a generosity, I think, to sometimes just let things happen.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that it's not that the industry doesn't understand, it's more that the industry doesn't understand the sense of urgency of what we're talking about. Because I strongly believe that we still have a window of opportunity to change the future that we see today. But this window of opportunity is quite small one. It's between 18 to 24 months, in my view. If we don't do something dramatic in this period of time, the future will be a concentrated market, an inefficient market, and we will all suffer from it, and our kids will suffer from an inefficient mobility market. And we need to collaborate, I think, much faster. And one of the key enabler to create this level of collaboration is standardization in the market. We see how standardization can solve a lot of ways to collaborate. I can give an example from a different area of world trade. There's one single thing that enable
the world trade, the way it is right now, is standardization of a container size. When people agree about what will be the size of a container, of a standard container, the height, the width, the length of a container, then you can build a whole ecosystem around the thing. The rails, the trains, the cranes, the ships, everything is now synchronized towards this one standardization. And because mobility is so hyper-fragmented, creating this standardization is key element. But we have a very short period of time. And if we will try, and there are a few players that are trying to build a single protocol like the HTTP for mobility, it won't work. It won't work because the time that the market will adapt it, the window of opportunity to collaborate and to build a different market will just shut down. We won't have anything to build from. So this is why at Here Mobility we take such a proactive approach, and we don't wait for this standardization to just happen by itself. We create this standardization. We connect to all the different mobility services by ourselves. We do all the hustle of connecting and adapting to many different protocols, and then make it accessible with a single API. And I think that once you have it, you can start building an entire ecosystem that can collaborate together.
Fantastic. So if you're both right, and this is a complicated but walk in the park, and in 10 years' time it's all fantastic, the telcos have got the 5G networks there and the data sharing is off the scale, it's all amazing. Who's going to pay for it all? Is there enough revenue to pay the security specialists, the insurers, the telcos, the OEMs, the service providers? Is there enough revenue to go around to support this amazing new complex emerging ecosystem, Sebastian?
Yeah, I don't think this will be a major issue. I mean, if you look at London is a 40 billion pound transportation economy. That's a single city. You have about 20 million journeys taking place here every day. The sheer scale and size and the fact that it's one of the most basic needs humans have will make sure there is sort of the necessary financial and economic impetus behind this new emerging market. I think just to respond to what you were saying, I don't see the future as quite as bleak. I'm a historian by training, and you do obviously have a number of precedents. If you look at the age in which oil became a dominant global force, you had companies like Standard Oil who had basically sort of a quasi monopoly. They were eventually taken apart by the regulator. I think the regulative force of governments, of policymakers, shouldn't be underestimated here. And I think we are now in a phase where no one quite knows and is also probably a little bit hesitant to tinker with the innovation that we see taking place. But there will be a phase where the market is going to settle down, where we start to see a certain equilibrium that will then prompt a regulatory response if it's clear that there are clear imbalances in the market that need to be addressed. So I'm a little bit less bleak about the future outlook. What I do like about what it is you're doing is you're trying to create opportunities for smaller players to be surfaced, to tap into new revenue streams, and that from a sort of JLR perspective is certainly something that I find quite appealing, because as a premium player we will always be focusing on a certain clientele, which means that some of the challenges around liquidity and ETAs are obviously something that we do need to sometimes worry about, and that means really interesting stuff you're doing there.
Okay, thank you. And I have to say that for the part of the financial need in order to create this new area, I completely agree that it won't be a problem. I will even add to it that currently the cost of inefficiency of traffic in UK, US, and Germany alone is estimated at around $500 billion on an annual basis. That's a huge cost that we all pay. And if we will be able to reduce it, that's a major earning that we can get that can finance this industry and a lot of other industries.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm really interested in questions from you guys, just because there's been a lot of interesting things here discussed already. So one more question, and then if we could get some mics ready for the audience, that would be fantastic. So my final question is, who owns the customer experience? Who is accountable for the customer experience and the customer journey, with there's so many different parts of the ecosystem involved and multimodal channels of transport?
So we recognize when we think about individuals who live, for example, in central London, may not have a car, that they have a lot of choices. What we really want to do is we want to stand out, especially through service design, through attention to detail, through really sweating every single aspect of a solution in a customer journey. Deliver solutions that in particular instances may just be the right thing for a customer. But we recognize that, on occasions they might take an Uber, on other occasions, because they, drive to the opera or into the country, they may use one of our services. So I think context is very important. Understanding, having this empathy to really understand what people want to get out of a particular service experience, and then delivering that, and also recognizing that you can't be everything to everyone. You need to really stand out and be recognized for doing something exceptionally well, and stick to that. That's sort of our philosophy.
I think that what we see is that a lot of different players try to be very dominant in this space as well, to dominate the user experience. And part of democratizing the marketplace or the mobility market is not only have a platform for many different mobility services and only one way to experience it. On the contrary, to open it up to many different experiences. So, for example, if you buy your airline ticket on the website of an airline, then you can now have the access to mobility marketplace contextually within the website. You don't need to get out of this website and purchasing your airline ticket. You can just on the checkout page get an access point to many different service providers from the airport to your hotel. And this is very powerful because we don't want to force user experience to use one single solution. We believe that this should be contextual. If you're in the hotel and you want to take your drive, maybe you will prefer to take it from the lobby on a self-service kiosk. Sometimes if you use an application, let's say a restaurant aggregation application, Click a Table or a few others, sometimes if you want to take a ride to the restaurant from this application, you don't want to go out from this application. You want to consume this ride within this application. That's the real democratization of mobility marketplace.